Welcome to another episode of the Global Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Crillo. Today we have Andrew Freed. He's a real estate agent and investor based in Worcester, Massachusetts, and his firm oversees a portfolio of over 550 units. Andrew worked as a corporate project manager for over 10 years on the W-2 track, and then shifted his focus to real estate investing, and in 3 years went from 0 rental units to over 300 while working a W-2, often using creative financing strategies and syndications. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you have an interesting background prior to getting involved with real estate. You were on the W-2 track. So let's talk about what you were doing before you kind of got that real estate investing bug.
Well, I really lucked out because I got the perfect role to set me up as an asset manager for real estate, which is essentially what I do right now. And what I did was I was a grant manager at a research organization called the Broad Institute of MIT at Harvard. And over there, I managed a portfolio of research labs. I had to manage their budgets. I had to manage their projects. I had to manage the income and the expenses. And it really set me up right to be an asset manager for managing a plethora of different properties all at once, right? But going back to, like my original track, like do you want me to go into like the whole W-2 thing or I'm just...
Yeah, go into we'll go into everything that you want to do and we can cut this out. It's not a problem, but just go into your W-2. This is perfect because this is what everybody has a unique background. So it just gets them to what they're doing now. So
I just don't want to like talk for 5 minutes and not let you jump in.
No. This is all about you. I'm supposed to, you know what I mean? So we're about finding out about what you got going on. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, more or less, I was enamored by the W-2 track, right? Get a good job, get a good education, get a nice 6-figure job, get a job at a swanky organization, the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. And I did all of that, right? It took me 10 years to do that. All through my 20s, I did that. I got my bachelor's, I got my master's, I got the condo in Boston. Like I did it all, right? But at the end of the day, I felt empty. I felt like I had so much more potential to give and put on the table. And like, ultimately, what scared me most was the fact that like, yeah, maybe I have 6 months, maybe I have 12 months of reserves, but I still had to crawl back to that job every single day, right? I relied on that job for my livelihood. And at that point, I really decided I need to make a change. And that's when I found this beautiful book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I ate the purple pill. It opened my eyes to the power of real estate. And at that point, that's when I decided I'm going to leverage my W-2 and house hack 10 multis in 10 years and ride off to the sunset with 30 units. That was my original goal going into it. And that's what I was aiming to, my first couple of years.
That's awesome. That's great. When you ate the purple pill, as you say, what was, other than just having to crawl back to your job and stuff like that, was there anything else that was like a wake-up call that really changed your mindset? Were there other people that you saw maybe 10, 20, 30 years ahead of you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, one of the big turning points for my real estate endeavor, it took me, I think, a year to get up to 7 units. And then in 3 years, I had a couple hundred units. I found a mentor. I found somebody named John Bambachi. The guy owned hundreds of rental units in my area. And I found a way to provide him value. I ended up starting a meetup under his brand, becoming an investor-focused agent under his brokerage, the #1 agent, right? And because of all that, he really felt the need to take me under his wing. So I started doing deals on myself. I would call him for advice. He would give me advice. I would, I would avoid landmine after landmine just by talking directly with my mentor. And then over time, I took on bigger deals. He ended up partnering on my first syndication. It was a success. And then at that point, I kind of leveraged that to start building my own private equity and syndication real estate firm.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you went from owning that condo in Boston, as you talked about, and really leveraging that to do 10 properties in 2 years, which is great. I mean, what a resourceful way of getting involved with rental property.
Let me restate that. My original goal was to get 10 multifamilies, house hack once per year, 10 times with 30 units, and ride off to the sunset. I had no intention of owning hundreds of rental units. It's kind of worked out that way.
Interesting. What would you say would be some of the strategies that you've utilized, investment strategies, maybe creative financing, something else that you've utilized in your journey to this 550 units that you have today?
So many amazing strategies that people don't realize are out there, right? The low down payment loan, FHA loan, or 5% down conventional loan on a multifamily property, a fantastic way to get into a lot of units with very, very little money, right? So, I did that 3 or 4 times and I got in upwards of 12 units with only $100,000 just by leveraging moving into a primary residence for a year, and then turning into a rental and keep doing that a couple times. That's a fantastic way to get a lot of units with very, very little money. Another fantastic strategy, line of credit, right? You can get a home line of credit on your primary residence. And if it's your primary residence, there's some line of credits going up to 100%, right? So you can really leverage the equity in your primary residence to buy more properties or house hack more properties. Those are two very easy strategies. I mean, I could keep going and going if you want more tips.
No, that's perfect. That's great. Yeah, there's so many different when you're dealing with the, I guess, 4 and under unit properties. There's so many different financing tools and products and services that are available to those investors. And also the properties that you're buying are highly liquid. You know what I mean? You can easily sell these compared to a larger apartment complex that's going to take you 6-12 months to sell.
Yep. That's a good point. Very good point.
So let's talk about what you guys are doing today. What is your company's current investment strategy and kind of really your overall current investment philosophy?
So we recently started a syndication fund, and our entire philosophy is we buy value add property at 20 to 30% discount on a price per unit basis. We allocate money to enhance the revenue while decreasing the expenses in many different ways, separating the utilities, putting the utilities back in the tenant, creating square footage, adding bedrooms. Those are some easy ways we increase the NOI while decreasing expenses. At that point, once our business plan is complete, we suck out money via refinance once we've forced appreciated the property and use that money to buy more and more and more property. So it's very much just buying value add property. And we specifically target, probably areas of a cap rate of like 6.5 to 10%. So it's a nice balance of kind of cash flow and appreciation. We typically like to find, properties with our cash flow far exceeds the cost of the interest rate.
Yeah, one thing when I was buying small multifamilies, 3 units, 4 units in Connecticut, it was one thing that we'd find was that you would have electricity that would be submetered, but you never had the water, right? That'd be submetered. Is that what you're doing? You're going in and submetering these properties for water?
Fantastic question. So we actually buy, a lot of the structures we buy are between 5 and 20 unit properties, right? And they were all constructed between 1880 and 1920. That's where workforce housing was created. These are all old mill towns, right? Back then, they didn't separate water, right? So if we were going in there and separating water, we would have to redo all of the plumbing. So it'd be very costly for probably not that much of a benefit. However, we do always separate heat and electric. We buy a lot of these multis with sometimes it's being combined. There's a lot of really good programs out there. There's heat pump rebates where you can get, heat pumps, 50 cents on the dollar. Get heat pumps 50 cents on the dollar, and they're a fantastic way to separate heat while, saving costs.
Yeah. That's what we always made sure that always the heat was separated and then the hot water as well. We would always have to pay for water, but that was just kind of one of the things I think of the Northeast with how that works. It's interesting with these properties. My first one's being like from 1904 or 1900, something like this. And there's no insulation in these properties because it was so inexpensive to heat them. So they would heat everything. And if you dig down a couple feet in the backyard, you'd probably hit coal. And it was so there's no insulation in these properties. Water, all these natural resources were not expensive. So they weren't really playing with it. And, fast forward 50, 70, 100 years, we start worrying about this stuff and we start putting in stuff like insulation. You know what I mean? And when water was put into these properties, they weren't obviously put in 1880 when they're put in different parts of the property, which might be a little more susceptible to freezing. So it becomes a little bit more management intensive, these properties, huh?
I think a good analogy is you take a 1950s structured car and then you try to put modern electronics in that car. Sometimes it just doesn't fit, right? It wasn't meant for that originally, right? But yeah, you got to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we're talking about, properties with cap rates of 10%, these are mainly C-class assets. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would definitely say B, C-class assets is where we typically like to purchase it.
Are you guys self-managing these or are you using a third-party property manager?
So I think the magic in managing, these smaller type assets, so we play in this nice little sweet ground between 55 and 50 units where it's too small for private equity to play in because it's so management intensive because you can't have on-site property management, right? So to find an effective scattered site property manager is very, very challenging. So we actually had to bring it in-house, which is honestly our competitive advantage in my opinion. But we're vertically integrated. We have on-site property managers. We have technicians. We have painters. So yeah, we have about an organization of like 25 people or so.
Yeah. The private equity model, it doesn't work in the sense of two ways. First of all, they'd have to buy so many of these properties to kind of move the needle on their fund or whatever it is, on their capital. And the second thing is, like you said, there's not some on-site. So they just don't buy like 100 unit and have the on-site and make the call once a week and with them and see how everything's going. When you're within like a scattered plot kind of investment strategy on the smaller scale, it's like you said, it's more management intensive, but that's also, if it can be done right, if you have your own managers, I feel it's much easier to self-manage these with your own team than bringing in third-party management, definitely with C-class properties, I find.
Yeah, I mean, and you care more. Ultimately, if you're managing, you're going to manage it more from like an asset manager perspective rather than from a property management perspective. Because ultimately, if you're hiring a property manager, your incentives aren't aligned most of the time. They want to make the most money for you, and you want to create the most profitable, business in the form of your properties, right? Sometimes your incentives aren't aligned, but when, you own the company, you can ensure your incentives are aligned.
Do you have money sitting in the stock market and you're worried about it? Or worse, you have money sitting at the bank, not keeping up with inflation? My name is Charles Carrillo, founder and managing partner of Harborside Partners. And since 2006, I've been investing my money and my family's money into income-producing properties. These are real assets, real properties with real addresses that produce real cash flow. At Harborside Partners, we provide passive investors who love real estate with a turnkey investing solution. If you want to put your money to work in real estate but can't find deals, don't have the time to get funding, and the last thing that productive people want to do is manage real estate. We find the deals, we fund the deals, and we manage the tenants, the termites, and the properties. Partner with us at investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. Go to investwithharborside.com. If you love real estate, you like the idea of passive income, and believe that income-producing properties will appreciate over time, go to investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. So let's talk about when you're buying a property, because with these properties, as we said, they're more management intensive after you have tenants in there, but also there can be, these properties range in all different types of qualities when you're buying them with, could be a lot of old systems, a lot of things that were patched up. The weird stuff I found in decades of doing this with older properties, it was something that you never ceased to amaze you. Can you tell us a little bit about when you're buying a property? Are you going in or are we just getting this prep to kind of fixing the main things, deferred maintenance, and renovating a couple things and then putting it out? Or are we doing like full renovations? Obviously, it's all on a per case basis, but like, what is your goal on that finished product being before it gets rented out?
Yeah, I mean, we buy more or less value add properties, and we're not going in there, we're not gutting everything, right? But we're ensuring the electrical is in good standing, the plumbing's in good standing. Each of the properties is at least in the 90th percentile of how it looks cosmetically, right? Like LVP floors, granite countertops, decent cabinets, LED lighting, like it's rental grade, right? But at the same time, you'd be surprised how many units are not rental grade out there and don't look decently, right? And ensure the roof has a good 10 to 15 years left in it. We're not gonna replace a roof if it has 10 years left in it, right? But we're gonna budget money to ensure it can last another 5 years up front, right? So we try to build a construction plan up front so we don't have to worry about CapEx for the next 10 to 15 years. It's kind of the goal.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense because, like I said, these are, all properties you have, there's going to be certain mechanicals that have to be changed every 10, 15 years for sure, no matter how new or old the property is. But there can be other things that are maybe not present or that you're aware of for most people that might not be as educated as you are in the purchasing process that they might not pick up on. So that's a lot of great information of having that funds kind of put aside, that reserve. So when you purchase.
And, I would say one of the big things that's missed at these older properties is always you got to budget money for the foundation, right? And just because you're putting money in the foundation doesn't mean it's a bad foundation. It just means you're reinforcing it. It's been there hundreds of years, right? But a lot of times you got to budget money towards lolly columns. Sometimes you got to budget money towards, reeing up some joists. Sometimes you got to budget money towards repointing the foundation. You got to think ahead. Because ultimately that's holding up everything else you're putting into the property. So just keep that in mind, especially with these older properties.
Yeah. So we've talked about the properties here. Let's talk about kind of the tenants that you work with. And one thing we find, especially as being a previous investor in the Northeast, it's very tenant friendly. What are you doing on the front end to help make the whole rental process better down the road? Is it do you do a lot of upfront screening? I mean, how does that process work to really weed out potential bad tenants and make it a lot more of a consistent, less volatile rental environment?
So a lot of our tenant management issues really derive from inherited tenants, right? Because ultimately, if you have a strong leasing process up front, and you're very stringent about who you put in your unit, you can avoid a lot of these headaches, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, somebody with decent credit score, we're talking 650 to 700 credit score. We're talking somebody with no evictions. We're talking somebody who makes 3 times the rental income. We're talking to somebody who maybe has 6 months of reserves in their bank account. You can always ask for their bank statements, right? So these are things you're going to want to do in advance to ensure you're getting a strong tenant up front, and you avoid these tenant management issues, right? But ultimately, I think when it comes to Massachusetts, yeah, I mean, it is definitely a tenant-friendly state. It's sometimes challenging to operate in. But if you know how to operate in the state, then you could be very successful, right? And what I mean by that. So I mean, understanding when and how to use cash for keys, right? Understanding that, ultimately it's about ROI over principal. Like I really don't care if the tenant, if the tenant gets 2 months free rent out of me, if they leave the apartment in 2 months when an eviction normally takes me 3 to 6 months to happen, that's a win for me. Right. And a lot of people will be like, oh, but I don't want to give them 2 months. They don't deserve that. And be like, but it's going to cost you more money in the long run by taking their quote unquote principal approach. Right. So those are just some examples of how you can operate in this market effectively where others operate inefficiently.
Yeah. If you've ever spoken to landlords that, let's say, weren't successful as previous property owners, landlords, and you can see if they're very strict when you're working with C-class properties, I found it's a lot more give and take and negotiation with working with people, because you're working with people, you're renting to people that are, your clients. They are paycheck to paycheck. I mean, they hit tough times, and it's kind of like you're working with them, and you can still make money doing it, and you have to know when to, move it to the next level. But you find some people that weren't successful, and it's like, it just doesn't work. You have to be flexible with working with people. And the same thing about the principals thing is, if you're hard-headed about it, you're not going to make money in it. Your principal and your cash flow and your whole investment is going to go out the window. Unless, just like you said, just get them out of there and I can move on and clean slate for the next tenant.
I mean, that's just business in general. Like, nobody wants to work with a hard ass, right? Like, people want to work with easy people that are easy to work with, right? And that's just business. And that's honestly how I think people should manage their properties.
So, investing in 5 to 50 unit properties, obviously, when you're getting into that higher number, you are most likely, you're having financing up front. How are you usually financing, or, you're having a longer term financing, maybe with local banks or credit unions? How are you doing financing your smaller purchases that are, say, 5, 10, 15 units?
So the magical thing about Massachusetts is it actually has some of the most credit unions out of any state. I think it has over 300 banks in Massachusetts, right? So because of that, there's a plethora of portfolio lenders. And we fund a lot of our smaller properties from these portfolio lenders, these small credit unions and banks with 3, 4, 5, 6 branches in different markets, right? And a lot of times we go to these banks and they're funding the property at 75% and 100% of the construction at like 6.5% interest rate. So there are lenders out there that would fund projects like this, and we get really good lending on these value add deals.
That's great. Yeah, it's one thing I found when looking for financing up north. If you went with local small banks and credit unions, they'll kind of bend over backwards for your business. It's kind of funny though, because if you contact one that I found, like maybe like an hour away from the property, they're like, well, what are you doing contacting us? Aren't there ones near where you are? But when you speak to ones, they'll have the amount of unique plans. I had one that did it on a mixed use property. They did a 25-year fully amortizing loan, you know what I mean, on commercial property. And this is usually worth something 5, 7, tops 10 years, you know what I mean? But you have these people that it's in their neighborhood, it's in the area where they want to service, and they're kind of bend over backwards for that business and to really show that community what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, and the main thing about a portfolio lender is they're lending their own money. Right. So they can lend it however rules they want. It can go outside any guidelines because it's their own freaking money. Right. So that's what's really powerful about these portfolio lenders. And to your point, like, I think a pro tip to get access to some of these portfolio lenders, possibly outside your market, is getting a warm intro from a lender, from somebody in their network who already has loans with them. Right. Really easy way to get in their network and have them start giving you loans. And once they give you one loan, the floodgates open.
Yeah. No, that's a lot of great information. So over all the years of working and being a real estate investor, what would you say when you look at other real estate investors, being part of that meetup and everything? What do you say some of the common mistakes you see other real estate investors make?
What I think some of the most common mistakes other real estate investors make is after they have a proven track record and they want to start to scale and potentially use other people's money, it's more about making your investors money than making you money in your first couple of deals. You really need to establish a strong track record. And I'll just give you a quick example. My first syndication, a 69 unit in New Bedford, Massachusetts, I think we had 7 GPs on it. And I mean, I had like 7-8% equity in there. I didn't have a lot, right? It didn't make me a lot of money, but I knew if that syndication was successful, that would lead into a lot more deals for me in the future. And that's exactly what it did, right? So that'd be my advice is, think about, when you first start scaling, think about providing your investors value first, and it will really provide fruit in the long run for your business.
Nice. What would be advice, because how you started with the W-2, what would be your advice for someone with a job right now who wants to start investing in real estate, possibly active, possibly passive?
My advice to you would be you have a freaking asset, right? And the asset is the fact that you have a W-2 and you're lendable and you can get access to these FHA loans and these 5% down conventional loans. Those are super powerful loans to get you in property with very, very little money, right? So what I would say is, think of your job not as a prison, but as a tool to acquire these multifamily assets with these low down payment owner occupied loans and start accumulating 3, 4, 5, 6. And once you have those under your belt, you'll have options, right? Very easy way, very low risk way to get started, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, and then doing those deals yourself and being active on them, you learn so much about being a real estate investor with limited risk. Like you said, I mean, there's only a handful of tenants. You're not going to get overwhelmed really. It's not like buying a 20 unit property and not knowing what you're doing. You're buying 2-3 units at a time and you kind of learn how everything works. You don't have massive, tenant turnover at the same time. You have one here. You kind of learn what's going on. That's why I found that it was an easy way of really dipping my toe in and learning the real estate business from the inside without having, because you have to do it sometime. You can only have so many mentors and podcasts, you know what I mean?
And what I say is one of the biggest arguments I hear from people is like, oh, I don't have the money. I'm like, you absolutely have the money, right? Most people's net worth lie in 2 things, right? Their primary residence, their property, or their 401k. You can literally borrow your 401k to buy primary residence properties, right? So the money's right there. Stop making excuses. Start making it happen.
Yeah. Andrew, kind of as we wrap up here, you've been very successful in your previous career and now in your current career of being a real estate investor. What would you say some of the main factors contributing to your success over the years?
I would definitely say, you can't give up no matter what. The truly successful people understand that failure is a path to success, right? And the true measure of success is how much you iterate along the process to become the best version of yourself.
Nice. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Andrew, how can our listeners learn more about you and your business?
They can find me at Investor Freed on Instagram. They can look on my website, freedommanagement.net. We always have good opportunities out there. And you can find me at Andrew Freed on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Perfect. Okay, we'll put those links into the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on today. It was great having you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hi guys, it's Charles from the Global Investors Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in getting involved with real estate but you don't know where to begin, set up a free 30-minute strategy call with me at schedulecharles.com. That's schedulecharles.com. Thank you.